And welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the X Zone Broadcast Network, iHeartRadio, Simul Radio, and Simul TV. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. My guest this hour is Nick Redfern. We've had the pleasure of having Nick on many times over the past years. He works full-time as a writer, lecturer, and journalist. He writes about a wide range of unsolved mysteries, including Bigfoot, UFOs, the Loch Ness Monster, alien encounter, and government conspiracies. Nick has written 33 books, including Men in Black, The Zombie Book, For No One's Eyes Only, Final Events, Secret History, Monster Files, The World's Weirdest Places, The Pyramids and the Pentagon, and The Chupacabra Road Trip. He writes for MUFON UFO Journal, The Mysteries Universe. Nick has appeared on numerous television shows, including Fox News, the History Channel's Ancient Aliens, Monster Quest, and UFO Hunter, VH1's Legend Hunters, National Geographic Channel's The Truth About UFOs and Paranormal, BBC's Out of This World, MSNBC's Countdown, and SyFy's channel's Proof Positive. His website, Nick Redfern, Fortean.blogspot.com. And Nick, welcome back to the X Zone.
Hey, Rob. How's it going?
Hot like you, my friend. Hot like you.
It's very hot here, yeah. It's the feel-like temperature right in Dallas is 103.
My goodness. Nick, let me ask you this question. When the heat is up like this and the temperatures are up, do more people have paranormal experiences than if it was cooler weather?
I don't know. It's hard to say, really. I mean, typically, the most important thing, I guess, in this kind of weather is that you've got air conditioning, you know.
Sure.
I think that's what most people are focused on, that the air conditioning's running properly rather than the paranormal.
Well, it's always great having you with us, Nick. And I understand you've got a new book coming out.
Yeah, it comes out in about 10 days from now, and it's called Paranormal Parasites, published by Llewellyn Books. Basically, it's a study of cases throughout the world and throughout history where people have had encounters with supernatural beings, and it seems as if the people, the victims, have quite literally sort of been drained of their life force, drained of their energy, sort of like a psychic vampire kind of situation. And so that's why the book's called Paranormal Parasites. It looks at what we might call the supernatural equivalents of folkloric tales of vampires and things like that.
So would that be equivalent to a psychic vampire?
Yes, you know, when people talk of vampires, I think most people think of sort of Hollywood movies, either the old guy with the cloak, and the turning into a bat, etc., or they look like a cross between Marilyn Manson and Rob Zombie, that kind of thing. But that's sort of the pop culture entertainment angle of vampires. Now, when you mention vampires as well, the first thing people think of is, blood being drained from people's body. But what I've found is that if you look back at a lot of the old legends and tales of vampires, it was not so much the blood that vampires crave, but the essence of the person, or the soul, or their life force, their energy. And that's what we find in cases still going on to this very day, almost as if these things are sort of literally feeding on us, but feeding on, as I said, like our energy levels, our life force, rather than, the kind of thing you would see in, an old black and white horror movie or whatever.
So why do they exist, Nick?
Well, I think they exist to prey on us. I think it really is that sort of dark and simple as well. I think whatever they are, and they come in various different guises, as we can talk about in the show, I think they are sort of feeding on us in a very strange way, in the same way that we feed on things as well, And I point out in the book, I think a lot of people, if not most people, don't realize the bigger picture, that in some respects the Earth might be like a farm. You have the analogy of the cows on the farm, they're sort of happy and eating the grass, etc., until the day comes, when they get taken away.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, it's kind of like that situation with these paranormal parasites. People have encounters with them and confrontations, and they fall sick and they feel weak and ill. And it's only then that they realize that, us, the human race, we're not the sort of the top animal after all, and that there are things that, in a strange way, are hunting on us, if you like.
So we may very well be part of something's food chain.
Yes, but we're just not sort of seeing the bigger picture, because, these accounts and encounters are occurring all around the world. Mm-hmm. But if you're not looking for these stories, you might not realize just how many there are, hundreds and hundreds of thousands. And that's just the reported ones, never mind those cases that, people are afraid or embarrassed to talk about. So, the picture is sort of very disturbing one, and the more we look into it, the more cases we find.
What kind of cases have you discovered, Nick?
Well, I'll give you one example.
Sure.
One of many. The issue of the black-eyed children.
Right.
Now, the black-eyed children, for people who don't know, it's a phenomenon that started to be reported in the late 1990s. Mm-hmm. And the first case that was reported came from a journalist, actually in Texas, where I live, named Brian Bethel. And although his wasn't the first case, he was the first one who really highlighted it because he was a journalist, and other people came forward claiming to have seen these sort of creepy kids that have now become known as the black-eyed children. And the reason they have that name is because that's typically how their eyes look. Not just like the middle of their eyes dark, but the entire eyes are totally black. What the usual scenario is, there'll be a late night knock on the door, sort of 10 or 11 at night. And of course, like most people, you'd think, who on earth's that at the door at this time of night? People look through the spy hole, and they see these two kids. And what's weird is that, most people, you wouldn't open the door to them at that time of night, but they do. And the witnesses have said it felt like they were being hypnotized or mind-controlled to open the door. And at that point, the children would sort of move forward closer to the door. And it's usually a young boy and a young girl, very pale skin, usually wearing hoodies and with these solid black eyes. And they insist on being invited into the house. Now, this angle of being invited sort of parallels the old vampire legends, where the vampire couldn't enter your home until you invited it in.
Right.
Well, that's still going on with the black-eyed children, where they say things like, we're homeless, can we come in? We're lost, can we use your phone? We're starving, we haven't got any food, we've not got nowhere to live. Can we come in? And so they're basically waiting for the person to say, yes, you can come in. And in some cases, they've got sort of really sort of crazily mad when people won't let them in. And they say, but you have to invite us in. We have to be invited. And it's like it's almost like it's like a line that they've said so many times over and over again. But in these cases, when the black-eyed children have been in the house, the witnesses have said they've suddenly felt weak, as if they're, again, like their life force has been drained from them. As one witness said, it was like how a diabetic might feel, if they'd missed breakfast and lunch, and then it's 8 o'clock at night, and they start to crash, and they get the shakes, and they feel weak and ill. That's how one of the witnesses described it. It was as if their life force was being eaten by these black-eyed children, and the witnesses very often suspect that is exactly what's going on. They're sort of using us as fuel, almost. And so the black-eyed children is sort of one of the most perfect in terms of describing the story, but also one of the most sinister aspects of these sort of paranormal parasites, the idea of these creepy, skinny, black-eyed kids trying to get into the house to bleed you dry of your life force.
Nick, stand by, my friend. You and I have to take our first break for this hour. Exonation Nick Redfern is our special guest this hour. And if you'd like to visit Nick's website, it's Nick Redfern, Fortean.blogspot.com. And once again, that's Nick Redfern, Fortean.blogspot.com. And Nick and I will be back on the other side of this break as we talk about, black-eyed children. We're going to talk about attached spirits, the men in black, and much more. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and you're listening to us on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, iHeartRadio, and Simul Radio. And if you're watching us on TV right now, you're watching us on the X-Zone TV channel exclusively on Simul TV. Nick and I return on the other side. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell. Nick Redfern is our special guest. Nick's website is Nick Redfern, Fortean.blogspot.com. And before we go into the break, Nick, we were talking about the black-eyed children. And I have to ask you this. Is there any correlation between the appearance of black-eyed children and any other paranormal event that may have introduced them to the world? For example, UFO sightings.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are actually some issues in relation to the black-eyed children where some researchers, have wondered if they could be extraterrestrial, that they have a UFO origin.
Sure.
And, of course, if you look at the history of ufology, you see these sort of black-eyed aliens,
yes,
not as the greys.
Mm-hmm.
And so the eyes, although the kids look human, apart from the fact that their skin's like extremely pale, like white as white. The eye is very much reminiscent of the so-called greys of alien lore. So people have picked up on that connection, and the fact that their skin kind of seems a bit strange, like almost like plastic. Doesn't look like it's sort of too smooth. So people have sort of made that kind of connection, but. In saying that, there are a lot of other weird stuff that goes on with the black-eyed children as well. For example, there are cases where dogs, particularly, pets in the home, have reacted in a very sort of nervous and terrified way. Several cases where, the dogs literally ran out of the living room and sat on the bed shaking, or even underneath the bed in one case. There are other examples where, after the black-eyed children have left the house, there's some cases where the owners, the witnesses, have suddenly experienced violent poltergeist activity in the home, as if some sort of residual energy had remained after these creepy kids had gone. And there are other cases where, for example, when the people are on the couch, sort of in this mind-controlled, hypnotized state, and the black-eyed kids are sort of draining them their energy. Light bulbs have exploded, and things like microwaves have suddenly stopped working. Again, as if there's some sort of interference which is affecting electrical equipment in the home as well. So, it actually is it's a fascinating topic, but it's a very disturbing topic because of not just the encounters, but these sort of spiraling spin-off aspects as well.
The fact that they only, if I understand you right, Nick, they only seem to come out at night would account for the white skin, but it would also show me that the color of the eyes has something to do with light sensitivity, and that sunlight or any bright light may in fact impede their vision.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, because they do. There's no doubt that they stick to certain sort of parameters.
Sure.
They rarely are ever seen in the day. They're usually just in twos, usually a boy and a girl, almost always between about sort of 11 and 14, no younger and really no older than that. And as you say, when they come out, it's when the sun's gone down and everywhere's in darkness. And, that when you look at the potential for eye sensitivity and the sort of milk white skin, then you could make a case that they're not, their normal environment is not sort of a bright, sunny environment, and maybe that has some bearing on their ability to interact in our environment, that maybe physically they have trouble, doing that.
Are they reported in all sorts of living areas, for example, downtown areas to local neighborhoods to country settings?
Yeah, I mean, people often imagine or assume that most of the encounters occur in isolated areas because it would be easy for them to get there and get away and not be seen. But it's actually not like that. We're talking about sightings and encounters in your average street, where you look out the window on a Saturday morning and, one person's cutting the grass, somebody else is walking the dog, a couple of kids have got a soccer ball or, a football or whatever. It's just like that. It's just regular streets. But what's weird is that in some cases on a busy street where, most people know each other, when the witnesses or the victims have said, did you see these two kids last night? Or have you seen them at all? Nobody else in the street has ever seen them. It's almost as if the people that are targeted in a strange way are the only ones who see them and experience them, almost as if it was occurring in sort of like a weird dream-like state or almost like a Matrix-like state, from the movies, like a sophisticated reality which isn't a reality after all, So there's a lot of strange things like that where they're sort of not just elusive, but they seem to be almost like too elusive.
Yeah, with all the closed-circuit television cameras that are out there, has anybody taken a photograph or have they been caught on surveillance cameras?
No, there's actually no photographs and nothing like that. But there are a lot of people who had the visit and who said that that yes, they got security cameras and things like that, and nothing showed up. And in one witness case, they actually had the footage of the guy opening the door and kind of standing there for a minute or two in sort of a weird limbo state, and then closing the door behind him. And of course, then we can't see what was going on inside because the door was shut. But nothing turned up on the film footage at all. All it showed was the guy opening the door and then kind of standing there for about 20 seconds in a bit of almost like a limbo state, and then closing the door. And yet, for him, it was a very real experience where he could see these kids. But absolutely, if you looked at the footage, you would just see a guy opening the door, standing there doing nothing, and then closing it behind him.
Isn't that strange?
Yeah, very strange. Yeah.
Nick, are there any other what some people would call paranormal seducers out there?
Well, yeah. I mean, you can look back throughout history, and you have what were known as the incubus and the succubus, and an entity known as Lilith. And these stories go back thousands of years, never mind decades or hundreds of years. And they're sort of typically male and female seducers, in essence. They would appear in people's bedrooms in the middle of the night, and you'd have this nightmare or this dream, of like a beautiful woman, and in some cases they would sort of just lean over the person and touch them. In other cases, they would have sex with them. But for the witnesses, it was almost like a ruse, because everything would turn very badly and very negative, because again the witnesses or the victim would start to feel ill and sick, and as if something was draining them again. And people who've had these encounters with the incubus and the succubus, people have described how in the next morning they tried to get out of bed, and they were just they could barely get to the bathroom. They felt they were going to faint. They were lightheaded. They had the shakes, and it was as if, quite literally, as if something was just, draining them throughout the night. And, like, for example, in ancient Babylonia, you find stories of the incubus, the succubus, and Lilith. Now, I don't know if you know this, but excuse me,
Sure.
in Newfoundland they have a specific one called the Old Hag.
Yes.
And now the Old Hag is like a modern day version, and as the name suggests, it's like this, this sort of creepy witch-looking old lady who again sort of manifests in the bedroom in the middle of the night, and the people are rendered to where almost like in a state of paralysis. They're unable to move as this old lady gets closer to them. And there are not in every case, but in a lot of the cases, the witnesses have said that as the old lady looms in, they don't. Not only do they feel sort of paralyzed and unable to move, but they also have this situation where their energy goes away. They can barely lift their arms and legs, and again, as if it's kind of like their equivalent of pulling up in the car at the gas pump, and filling up and then hitting the road. In a strange way, it seems that's almost like the incubus, the succubus, and the Old Hag actually does.
Are these events reported frequently in today's world?
Well, they are. And what I found, and that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, was because I did a few articles on this subject a few years ago, and I got a sort of tremendous number of reports from people who said words to the effect of, well, I had an experience like that, but I didn't want to talk about it. The times, I've heard about that. But when people realize that other people have had these encounters, then they're more willing to come forward. And I found a lot of parallels where it was certain specific entities that people were seeing, like the black-eyed children, the men in black, the Old Hag, excuse me, the black-eyed aliens of UFO history, and another category known as the shadow people. In other words, it wasn't just sort of every weird creature under the sun was having the ability to do this. It was specific ones and specific categories and certain time frames over and over again. The middle of the night, sort of 1 a.m. to 4 a.m.
Wow.
And with the black-eyed kids, it was late at night. So I was able to put together a lot of parallels,
Nick,
which again led me to believe, that these stories are genuine and they're worldwide.
Nick, I've got to take my news break at the bottom of the hour. Please stand by. Nick Redfern is our special guest, a most welcome guest and a good friend of the X-Zone Nation. His website is nickredford14.blogspot.com, and all of Nick's books are available on Llewellyn's website at www.llewellyn.com. I'll be back on the other side with Nick Redfern. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. Nick Redfern is my special guest this hour. His website is nickredfern14.blogspot.com, and we're talking about Nick's latest book that's going to be coming out in a couple of weeks, entitled Paranormal Parasites. And once again, it's available on Llewellyn's website, and I'm sure Nick's website, as well as, Nick, I would imagine, all online stores?
Yep, that's correct, yep.
All right, let's just switch a little bit from the paranormal seducers and black-eyed kids and get to the men in black. I never thought of them as being anything but, the old men in black were supposed to be government agents who were going around hushing people up from talking about their UFO encounters or their ET abduction experiences. What's changed over the years?
Well, actually, it's sort of an interesting scenario, because if you mention the Men in Black to most people, the first thing they're going to think of is Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, because when the movies came out in the 1990s, they were so successful all around the world that you didn't even have to be interested or even involved in the subject to know almost overnight who the Men in Black were. Oh, they're these guys who silence UFO witnesses. And of course, in the movies they had the black suit and the sunglasses, this black car, etc., etc. And so people had that imagery. But the movies were actually based on a comic book series of the same name, which came out in the early 1990s, and the rights were basically, used to make the movies. But a lot of people don't realize that that's just Hollywood's version. If you speak to, the vast majority of all the witnesses, they describe the Men in Black as being not unlike sort of adult versions of the black-eyed children. They're sort of, typically, their skin is very white,
Yes.
Almost look totally Botoxed, and they wear these old-style fedora hats, black suits, white shirt, skinny black tie, and they have these sort of bulging eyes. The eyes look normal in terms of how an eye looks, but they're sort of bulging, and they hide these bulging eyes behind these wraparound sunglasses. Now, if you speak to the vast majority of the witnesses who've been visited and threatened by the Men in Black, they describe something, again, which parallels the black-eyed children, where they felt that their self-will was being taken from them when there was a knock at the door, and they saw their own hand go into the door to open it, but they were trying to stop themselves from doing it. And usually they fail, and then the Men in Black walk in, and the person sort of stumbles a bit and, crashes down on the couch, and then they come out with their threat. But again, most of the witnesses have said that the Men in Black don't really look completely human. They look enough like us to pass among us, say, late at night in the shadows. But if you were to have a good look at them, you would think, wow, what's wrong with that person? And the answer is they may actually not be people, in the way we understand it. But there are a lot of cases like that where, and again, typically the Men in Black have to be invited in. They don't sort of force their way in. They sort of mind control the person to let them in. And so a lot of parallels there. And also there are similar cases with the black-eyed children where the witnesses have started, to the Men in Black, the witnesses have started to get the shakes and not feel well, and kind of feel depleted of any kind of strength or power. And these stories go back to the early 1950s. Now, the term Men in Black and Man in Black was coined in the early 1950s by a guy named Albert Bender, who lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut in the United States. And he wrote a book called Flying Saucers and the Three Men in 1962, which told his story. And way back then, Albert Bender was talking about how he would see these Men in Black type characters sort of literally materialize in his room and in this sort of like a smoky form, and then they would become physical, and they would have these sort of, they still have the old style fedora hat, and they would have these bright, shining, sometimes glowing red eyes or glowing white eyes, and who threatened him telepathically to leave the UFO subject behind or else. And if you read his book, it's almost like a cross between the X-Files meets some sort of gothic horror novel, H.P. Lovecraft. It's sort of like a cross between the two, because, and so that's really how the template, if you like, of the Men in Black really is. But so many people, due to the pop culture exposure, think the Men in Black are secret agents, so to speak. But the vast majority of people never ever report them like that. They describe them as being almost looking like a dug-up zombie, just jerky walking and pale and skinny and just looking very, very weird.
Earlier you talked about something that I'm hearing a lot about from paranormal investigators, ghost hunters, called shadow people. What can you tell us about those people, Nick, or those what are they? Illusions? Well, shadows?
Well, I mean, if you imagine, we all have shadows,
yes,
when the sun's out and there's a shadowy area, you can see your shadow. Well, if you imagine if that shadow suddenly broke free from you and independently started to move around, you'd freak out. But if you imagine sort of an independent shadow but with no person casting the shadow, that's the best way to describe it. Now, again, one of the interesting things is that most of these encounters occur in the dead of night, and it's never usually sort of 10:30, 11:30, or 12, and it's never usually sort of 4, 5 onwards. It's almost always between about 1 and about 3:30. And interestingly enough, that's when, arguably, we're at our most vulnerable, when you're in your deepest sleep state. Now, some people might say, well, these it's just people having bad dreams.
Sure.
But what's intriguing is that you can look into these stories all around the world, and the imagery is pretty much the same. They talk about seeing like a silhouetted human shadow, very often actually wearing like an old-style fedora as well, like the Men in Black, which suggests there might be some sort of connection. And there's sort of a subcategory within the shadow people known as the Hat Man, because people see this shadowy, silhouetted figure in the bedroom with what clearly is, some sort of a hat.
Sure.
Again, the people wake up and they know they're awake, or their mind's awake, but they cannot get the body to respond. And they see this shadow, this human shadow, in the corner of the room. And the closer it gets to them, the harder and harder it becomes to actually move and fight. And again, you have this angle of people being drained of energy. But in some of these shadow people stories, whereas with the black-eyed children, the Men in Black, the witnesses just start to feel ill, in some of the shadow people stories that I've got in the book, what they actually did, the shadow person would put their hand out and touch the person in the bed, and the process of touching them caused them to lose their energy and just start to feel weak. Kind of almost like, when you put a plug into an electric socket, the plug gets the energy and which fires up, the laptop or your bulbs or whatever. And it's kind of like that with the shadow people, almost as if when they touch you, that they're siphoning off your energy. And it's interesting that I don't have cases like that with the Men in Black or the Black-Eyed Kids, where if they touch you, that something like that will happen. But there's quite a few with the shadow people where they do, time and time again, say that he reached out or she reached out and touched me, and that's when I started to feel bad.
It's rather amazing that most of these stories happen when the person is in a basic sleep paralysis.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing because, there's this one school of thought that believes that, when we go to sleep at night, and, we all dream every night, whether we remember it or not, But I think we've all had a dream at some point which doesn't seem like just a normal dream, And one of the theories is that these entities can quite literally sort of invade our dream states and become a part of them. And that sort of goes back in ancient times as well, the idea that, dreams weren't just, sort of altered versions of things that happened in the day or your subconscious playing mind games with you, but that it actually, in some cases, as I said, you can go back thousands of years, where it was believed that supernatural entities had the ability to break into our sleep modes, if you like, and manipulate them and even become a part of them, and I think in some cases there's a good argument can be made, particularly when the people themselves feel they're in this weird sleep paralysis state. It's as if they really are in sort of like a semi-awake nightmare, which these entities are controlling, and it only comes to an end when they decide it's going to come to an end.
But sleep paralysis is a natural function of the body. The body secretes a hormone so that in our dreams we don't move. When we're, in our physical body, when we're dreaming, we don't move. For example, if this hormone wasn't given to us at the time of sleep, then if we were dreaming we were running, then our legs would move and we'd have physical responses to the dream. This way here we don't. And according to the medical community, that when a person comes out of the sleep state before the counter hormone to the sleep paralysis is given, then this is when they have the sleep paralysis.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we should stress is sleep paralysis is a recognized medical condition.
Yes, yeah.
The big question is, or the big issue is on the one side, the medical community who say that, the scenario that you just outlined, and then on the other side of the coin, you have paranormal researchers who point out, and quite correctly, that why is it, if this is just a product of the mind, why is it so many people around the world see the same thing? Like, for example, the shadowy figure in the fedora.
All right, Nick, we've got to take our final break. Please stand by. Exo Nation, Nick Redfern is my special guest. www.nickredfern.fortean.blogspot.com, and Nick and I will be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Welcome back, everyone. During the commercial break, my producer said, I suffer the old egg syndrome. I said, yeah. He said, yeah, my mother-in-law. And Nick said that he's heard this a million times. Two guys sitting in a bar. One guy says to the other guy, boy, my mother-in-law's a real angel. And the other guy says, really? Is she that good to you? He said, no, thank God she's dead. Oh, where do these come from? Boy, am I going to get mail for that one.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything.
Thanks, Nick. Silence is golden, old friend. Exo Nation, Nick Redfern is our special guest. His website is nickredfern.fortean.blogspot.com. And for the majority of the show, we've been talking about Nick's book that is coming out in a couple of weeks called Paranormal Parasites. And it'll be available on Nick's website, Llewellyn's website, and on all online bookstores everywhere. But you just also released another book entitled The Black Diary. What was that about?
Well, yeah, it was just coincidence that the books came out pretty much in parallel with each other, because they're actually put out by different companies, and that sometimes happens, where one's going to plan to put it out this month and somebody else is going to put a book out from me when it's a different company. And usually there's sort of 3 or 4 months or 5 months between. But in this case, they're sort of very close, which does happen now and again. But the Black Diary was actually my fifth book on the Men in Black, and it was I do a Men in Black book about every 18 months of all the new cases that have come out and that the people have shared with me. So the Black Diary is sort of written like the title of the book. It sort of reflects the fact that it's written as if you're reading one of my own journals. How I spoke to this person and that person. So it's sort of a study of the last 18 months worth of cases of the Men in Black that I've got from literally from all around the world. And again, they all have this sort of archetypal image of, the black suit, the black hat, but the very pale skin and, sort of the ability to control minds and so on.
Nick, are you getting more email from people who are claiming to be attached by spirits or having more encounters with spirits? And I've heard a number of stories, Nick, where people have gone to antique stores or estate sales, purchased something, and prior to that object coming into their house, they never had a paranormal experience. As soon as that object came into the house, bang, all hell broke loose.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of cases like that where strange things have happened. Coincidentally, I wrote an article for Mysterious Universe literally just a few days ago about a case from 1972 in England, in a small town in the north of England called Hexham, where two young boys playing in their backyard unearthed these two carved heads, stone heads. One looked male, one looked female, and they were dated as going back to sort of Celtic times, about 2,000-3,000 years. And what was weird was that when the kids took the heads into the house, they started to experience a lot of weird activity, where, for example, they would wake up in the middle of the night and see this almost like a werewolf-type creature looming over the bed, like a bipedal wolf sort of looming over them. What's more interesting is that the heads were actually handed over to an expert a doctor who worked in the field of Celtic archaeology and history named Anne Ross, and she experienced this sort of wolf-like entity in her home as well. So it was almost as if where the stone heads were going, this sort of paranormal energy or this entity was going with them as well.
So if somebody has an attached spirit, how do they get rid of them?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, because in many of these cases, it's as if the entity wants to kind of create this connection, and it's very rarely a positive connection. It's usually, manipulating the person, causing havoc in the home, terrifying them, or, as I said, we've been talking about tonight, you sort of using them as an energy source, and it's very difficult, or it's proved to be very difficult for a lot of people to get rid of them. And typically, the ways that have been achieved successfully are, for example, to sort of cleanse the house and focus your mind on getting rid of them, just banishing them. But it takes a lot of sort of self-will to really focus on it and not do it sort of half-hearted. You have to really put your mind to it and sort of almost self-hypnotize yourself to tell them to go away, to leave. And as I said, also, cleanse the house with things like sage, which has been over the centuries is sort of noted as a cleansing from supernatural activity. So, but for a lot of people, it's not easy. These things are kind of cling on to us, and get their claws in, and it's hard to get rid of them.
We were also talking about shadow people. I mean, besides turning the lights on in order that the shadow can't appear, how do you get rid of them?
Well, again, it's very much the same thing. It's almost as if they have this obsession with us, and when they've visited one person, possibly, to feed on them, they come back to the same person over and over again. It's not always like that. Sometimes a person only ever has one experience, but, it stays with them for their whole life because it was so traumatic. But in many cases, they just stay with that one person, and life can be sort of turned into a nightmare, for weeks, months, even years. So, there's certain things that are identical in some cases, and other ones, where they're a little bit different, so to speak.
Whatever happened to the Mothman from the Mothman prophecies? Has he popped up anywhere else, or has he continued to show where he was originally seen?
Well, yeah, it's interesting you should say that, because there was actually a wave of Mothman sightings in Chicago last summer. When I say last summer, I mean last year,
right.
Not this summer. And for people who don't know, the Mothman, which was the story of the Mothman was told in John Keel's 1975 book, The Mothman Prophecies, and then in 2002 it was turned into a Hollywood movie. And but the original story, in the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in late 1966, people reported seeing this sort of almost like a gargoyle-type creature, like a humanoid figure with wings and glowing red eyes. And it was seen around the town of Point Pleasant for roughly 12 months. And it all culminated when the Point Pleasant's Silver Bridge, as it was known, that covers the Ohio River, collapsed into the river and drowned more than 40 people. And a lot of people who lived in Point Pleasant suspected or thought that possibly the Mothman was like some sort of Grim Reaper type character that when it appears, it comes to take human souls. Other researchers and people in town thought that possibly the Mothman was like a warning entity, that appears in a strange way, tries to warn us of forthcoming disasters. So, but it primarily ran from 66 to 67, but you can find things very similar to the Mothman all around the world. And you could make a case that it's actually the same thing. For example, in England, they have one called the Owlman. In Houston, Texas, just a few hours from where I live, back in 1953, the local newspapers covered the story of what was known as the Houston Batman, which again was like a humanoid figure with wings. And so you can find these, and throughout history as well, you have things like the harpies, and as I said, like the gargoyles. which go back again thousands of years. But however, or in whichever way you sort of look at the motivations of the Mothman, there does seem to be this angle of disaster and death surrounding it, whether it's, as I said, whether it's causing it to occur or it's warning us of something.
Nick, with all the people that you have the ability to, to chat with and so on, have you noticed any particular increase in any specific area of the paranormal over the last year?
Well, definitely, yeah. I mean, it's difficult to sort of, say for sure why it's happening. I mean, in some cases, and specifically from my perspective, doing shows like yours sometimes sort of pushes people and inspires them to share their stories, which they might not have done before. So it kind of looks like there's more reports. You see what I mean? But whether it actually means there are more reports, I'm not sure. It could be a bit of both. But what I can tell you is that over the last couple of years, I've got more and more reports of the Men in Black and the Black-Eyed Children. I won't say there's been sort of like a soaring increase in the Hat Man and the Shadow People, but the Men in Black and the Black-Eyed Children, I've been getting more and more of those. Why that should be, I just don't know. But as I said, I think part of it could be just people are coming forward because they feel more comfortable when they know other people are talking about it, so they then share their stories that they otherwise wouldn't have. But I'm definitely getting more reports, put it that way. So.
Well, Nick, the time has come, my friend, when you and I must say so long. Again, Nick, always great having you on the show. Congratulations on the 2 books, Paranormal Parasite, that comes out in a couple of weeks, and on your recent release of The Black Diary. Nick, let our listeners know how they can find out more about you and how they can contact you if they have a story they'd like to share.
Sure. Well, I have a blog, World of Whatever, so if you go to the blog, there's a contact button there, which will take you to my Facebook page, and people want to share information, or if they want some advice or help on something that's happened to them, I'm always happy to try and, offer something in terms of rectifying the situations and whatever. So, if people want to share things, if they want to relate a story or they just need some sort of help or advice, I'm always happy to do that. And as far as the books are concerned, they're all available on Amazon.
Excellent.
Paperback, hardback, Kindle, and so on.
Super. Nick, thanks again for joining us. I look forward to the next time you and I meet back here in the X Zone. Until then, take care of yourself, my friend.
You too, Rob. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye, Nick. Nick Redfern has been my guest. www.nickredfernfortean.blogspot.com. I'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.